Good afternoon. Today is July 12th, 2013. My name is Sarah Wyckoff, and I'm conducting an oral history interview at American Legion Department of Illinois Convention in Springfield, Illinois with,
Joseph L. Houdek.
and could you also give us your address, please, for the record?
Yes, it's 2919 Ruby Street, that's R-U-B-Y, and that is Franklin Park, Illinois, 60131-2625.
Joe, which war did you serve in, sir?
I served during the Vietnam era.
What year were you drafted or did you enlist?
Well, that's a little story if you want to know about
Sure.
that. I was in junior college, and between my freshman year and sophomore year, I took a break, and because of that, I lost my deferment.
Yeah.
So after I finished, that was, let's see, September of '64 was when I started, and I took a break. I graduated June of '67 from junior high school, Morton Junior High School, or Morton Junior College, sorry, in Cicero, Illinois.
Okay.
I grew up in Lyons, Illinois.
Okay.
And so because of that break, I knew I was going to be drafted, so I figured to myself, I'm going to beat the draft and enlist. So I went to the Marines first. Well, I'm a John Wayne fan. So went to the Marines, and they says, well, we can promise you a pack and rifle in Vietnam. I says, I'll think about it and I'll get back to you. Went to the Air Force. They had a 4-year program, active duty, 2 years inactive reserve, I guess. Same with the Navy. The Army had a special program that time for 3 years active duty, 3 years inactive reserve. So which means after I served my 3 years active duty, I would have no reserve time unless I was called in for something, which, you know, eventually I was not. But so I decided to do that, and I was associate arts degree was I wanted to get into psychology and sociology. So they had a program, the Army is called 91G20, Social Work Psychology Specialist. So I had the sergeant come over to our house. I was living at home at the time. I was 21 already. And talked to him, and he promised me, yeah, we can do that for you. So I says, okay. And I signed, and I was on inactive duty. And this was in July of '67.
Okay.
I can't remember the date on that one.
Sure.
But to report to the AFE station, the Armed Forces Examination and Enlistment Station in Chicago on October 1 of '67. And then I'll let you ask some questions now to see where you want to go from here.
So where were you sent for boot camp?
Okay, basic training.
Sure.
Took the oath, and we took a train all the way down to St. Louis, and then bused from St. Louis to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri.
Okay.
Also known as Fort Lost in the Woods. And later on I found it was called Little Korea.
Oh.
So, and we'll go from there, and that's why I was mentioning that. So my basic training camp, I was with Alpha 32, which was Alpha Company, 3rd Battalion, 2nd Brigade. And our basic training class was comprised of mainly college-educated people and also National Guard. So the third day of basic, which was the 3rd of October, the company commander came out and said, you guys are intelligent. You play the game, and you won't have it too bad. If you don't, I make sure your life will be a living hell for the 8 weeks you have basic. So anyhow, so we had a good time. We did what we were told, and I had KP a couple of times, but in basic you did. Nowadays they don't have that. They have civilians doing everything for the military now. You don't have to pull that kind of stuff, but you know you do that. So you work a day in there. That was okay. I was asked, and they said never volunteer. But the company commander says, can anyone play instruments? And I says, well, I can play a drum. So our Alpha Company was called the Saints. So for the next 7.5 weeks, we kept playing When the Saints Come Marching In. We had 2 trumpeters, 2 trombonists, a bass drum, which was a young black guy that was probably about 5'4", and he was playing this bass, and I was 6'2" and 130 pounds. And I was playing the snare drum, but they didn't have the guard on your leg, so I had a black and blue mark for about 3 months on my leg from holding it and playing it. We had the strap. But anyhow, we had a good time in basic. After the 2nd week of basic, we were fortunate because we did what we were told. We had post privileges. We could go to the PX. And then I think the 3rd week, I flew home for the weekend. on a Mohawk Airlines out of Fort Leonard Wood or whatever the town was outside to St. Louis and American that way. And so I did that a couple of times, but finished basic on December 8th, if I'm not mistaken, of 67.
Sure.
My advanced training as a 91 G20 started December 1st at Fort Sam Houston, Texas. They wouldn't give me an early out, so I had to stay over as a holdover. And it wasn't a bad gig. I was battalion commander, or the battalion commander's driver. I would drive him occasionally if he needed something. I'd also drive a deuce and a half, learn how to drive a big deuce and a half, 2.5-ton truck. I would take food out to the new incoming basic training class, which they were not as smart as we were, and they were run rough. They really, really were. And it was a shame. I mean, there were some that had some education. A lot of them just got out of high school, or, some had problems with the police. And so you got a choice. You want to go to jail or you want to go to the service? So they did not have it as good as we did. I think the 7th or 8th week of basic, they finally got post privileges. Otherwise, if you didn't have those, you would be marched to the PX. You could buy what you needed. They'd march you back, and you had to stay in your area. So anyhow, so I was holdover. After basic training, if you complete it without any problems, you're promoted. I was an E1 when you go in. Everyone's an E1. I got out as an E2, which was not called a private at that time. So after being a holdover, I left Fort Leonard Wood right around the beginning of March for the next class at Fort Sam Houston, and I was made a PFC before I left. I was the first holdover in the battalion history to be promoted, not being permanent party. So I left there as a full PFC with the one stripe, which made my parents proud. Matter of fact, my parents had come down when I graduated from basic training. They drove down with my girlfriend at that time, a long time ago, and stayed at a hotel. They came for, like I say, the graduation, and my mother brought some Czech food that I liked. Our ancestry is Czechoslovakian. I'm second generation American. But anyhow, so now, do you want to ask some questions, or should I continue on?
Go ahead, continue, and then I'll chime in where I see an opening.
Okay, so I got to Fort Sam Houston, and I was in the quadrangle. That's where, when you were in the medical field, or as a medic, I had to take 2 weeks of medic training before I could go into my specific MOS. And it was kind of nifty where we were, because that's where all the medical officers would take their basic training. It was only a couple of 3 weeks is what I understand, but they'd have to learn how to salute. They'd have to learn military courtesies and all this. And after the 2 weeks, I was sent from one barracks then to where I was taking my advanced training, MOS. So we'd have our classes up on the second floor of the quadrangle, which was what they called it, and we'd be watching as they're marching around, and your other foot, your other foot. It was really comical how they would be marching and didn't really understand medical terminology or military terminology. And we'd have some fun. We wouldn't get in trouble. It was interesting. But while I was down there, one of the guys that I went to basic with, Bill Powell was his name, and he was an MP at Fort Sam Houston. So he looked me up, and I was available or had the ability to have a car while he was there, because a week after I got there, he broke his leg. So he couldn't do anything in the service for a while, and because we were in AIT, or Advanced Individual Training, we pretty much had post privileges as soon as we got there. We had cleaned the barracks and all this. We had to do what we had to do and be, as we call, strack. So you had to wear uniforms, had the starched uniforms and all this, and went to class. And so I was lucky enough to have a car, and I was able to go around and see parts of San Antonio. At that time, they were doing the Hemisphere. This was 1968, which was like a mini World's Fair. Okay. And this is when they were routing this San Antonio River through the town. They have the river walking off the river into San Antonio. So it was kind of an interesting time there. Plus, I had a first cousin who was living in New Braunfels. He was an attorney there. So I got to visit him and his wife, my cousins. I was there, I think, for got there in March, and I ended up leaving the end of May, I think, is what it was, about a 12-week course, if I'm not mistaken, or close to that. And so I got to spend a little time with them, learned how to play dominoes, never did, and I haven't played since. But if once you graduated from your AIT or MOS, if you did everything well, you didn't get any Article 15s or anything like that, you were promoted to the next grade. So I got this, that was, let's see, October through May, so whatever that's, November, 8 months I was an E4 already, which was really kind of nifty because most everyone else was an E3. PFC, so I had a little more rank.
Right.
So there were 4 of us that were assigned to Fort Huachuca, spelled Huachuca,
Okay.
70 miles south of Tucson, about 30 miles north of the Mexican border. So I decided to go out there. The other 3 took a little leave. I figured I'll just go right out there. I get out there and find out I'm attached to a weather station instead of in the hospital. And I got over there. I flew into Tucson, and from that took Apache Airways, which was a 12-seater plane, two props. And the pilot had the door open. He was smoking a cigarette, and you were hoping that we'll get over the mountains so we can land over at Fort Huachuca. And so got over there, reported to where I was supposed to, and he says, "You've been mal-assigned. All 4 of you have been mal-assigned. Your MOS, it was a 1-digit off, and we were sent there as weathermen instead of social workers." So the colonel, Fulbert colonel, he got me at the hospital. Then the other guys came in and they found out, what the heck, I was the only one that got to the hospital because I was an E4. The others were PFCs, and I forgot where they were sent. We all stayed at the same barracks. And very interesting barracks because one of the guys liked snakes, so he had a rattlesnake in his locker.
Oh dear.
This was a metal locker going up and down. Yeah. They were nice barracks. They weren't the old wood ones. They were cement ones or brick ones, just like I had at Fort Leonard Wood. We had brand new 2-story barracks. It was wonderful. So 8 men to a room. But anyhow, so I was working at the hospital, and it'll come to me the name of it because they did a movie there called Captain Newman, MD, with what's his name? They'll come to me, his name, the actor. But this was made before I was there, and it was a military movie. And so anyhow, so I got assigned there, and there was an E8, a master sergeant, who was the first sergeant at the hospital. He retired. I was the only one of rank. I became the NCOIC of the hospital. I said, what? I didn't know anything about hospitals. So I worked there, and we were part of 6th Army out of Presidio in California. And while I was there, the Inspector General came to inspect the hospital, and I was walking with him and so on and so forth. I got a beautiful letter and a commendation, which I still have the letter from him, and, which was very, very nice that he did that. But I was there for 4 months. One of the guys was from Massachusetts who knew the Kennedy clan.
Wow.
Now we don't have to worry. They're basically, the family's gone. But anyhow, the colonel had told us, and again, I don't remember his name, but says, if you know anybody in politics, you might want to write them and see if you can get out. So he wrote, we got out 4 months later from there. I was assigned to Fort Jackson in Columbia, South Carolina, and with another gentleman, Scotty, and I can't remember Scott's last name. The other 2 were sent to El Paso, Texas, Fort Bliss, and that was one of the guys that knew the Kennedy family, and he stayed in Texas where it was hot. So I ended up then, like I say, at Fort Jackson in Columbia, South Carolina, and I worked at the Mental Hygiene Consultation Service. That's what we were doing. I was working with psychiatrists. And we would be the first line to just talk with any military personnel as far as if they had any psychiatric problems. If we saw fit that they need to see a social worker, and then from there the psychiatrist, we would do that recommendation. I was in charge of two companies, and I don't remember what companies they were. They were infantry companies. And so that was my assignment, and I would go out daily, go out to the companies, talk with the company commanders, see if he had any men that needed to talk to me or whatever else. And so I was filling an E6 position, So let's see, I'm trying to think. So that was March or June, July, September, October. So I went there in November. And in, I want to say that was 69. About February, March of 69, I was made an E5, specialist E5. So, which was very good because now I was a non-commissioned officer. When I was at Fort, I'm just back at Fort Huachuca, being in the hospital, got to eat at the hospital mess hall.
Mm-hmm.
We had great food there, and the dietitian, she was a lieutenant, and we'd go in after working, and she'd make us put steaks on the grill or something like this. It was really a nice gig there. Unfortunately, like I say, I was male assigned, and I want to get back into my MOS. So getting back to Fort Jackson, so I was promoted to E5 in February of 69. So which or thereabouts. I'd have to check my DD 214. So it was really kind of nice to have that happen to me, to make rank in such a short period of time and never having to go before a promotion board. So anyhow, I was there, met a young lady in January of 69, and we don't want to go through that. So anyhow, go on.
She was from South Carolina.
Yes.
So you were single.
Oh, you want to turn the lights back on?
No, we better stop here for just a
Okay.
minute. So you were single while you were in Texas.
I was
in
single in Arizona, yes, and then I got there, and we did marry. Her father was a retired Master Sergeant E8, and he was in the medical corps. So I started dating her because one of the guys that I was were at my mental hygiene consultation service, he was dating a girl there. He married, and so I said I didn't know anybody, so I'll talk to my wife, and I think she works with some ladies at a travel agency in Columbia, South Carolina. So we dated, and so eventually we did get married in May of that year. In May of 69,
Mm-hmm.
I got orders. Just before that, I got orders for Korea, South Korea. And one of the companies that I was working with, the captain there, and I wish I could remember his name. He was a super guy. Gregory Peck was the one in Captain Newman,
Okay.
MD. There we go. I knew it would come to me. But anyhow, I talked with the captain. He became aide de camp, so he was aide to the general of the camp of Fort Jackson. So I talked with him. I says, I just got orders. And, 2 of us got orders for Korea, 2 for South Vietnam. And if you were they had in the mental hygiene MHCS, no one ever, if they were there, you were there for your duration.
Yeah.
So it was very strange that someone got orders to go and leave. So I talked with him. He says he'll see what he can do to see if I can get reassigned somewhere else. Because if I would have stayed there, I would have made E6, which would have really been good in less than 3 years making an E6 staff sergeant. It would have been a spec 6. But anyhow, the captain, he says, no, you were on a named levy, which means my name was on the orders. I had to go to South Korea. The other 2, I found out when they got over to California, they were sent back here and they stayed in the States. But I went over there. But I was over there as an E5. And I was sent to the 121st Evac Hospital out in Ascom City, South Korea, which was about 12 miles south of Seoul.
Okay.
ASCOM is where General Douglas MacArthur came in during the Korean War to break so we could separate them because all of our men were down in Busan or going
So
south.
you're near Incheon.
So, yes, Incheon, that's right. Thank you.
You're
That's where he came in, Incheon. I forgot. I didn't like Korea that much. But anyhow, so I was there, and when I got there, when I left Fort Jackson, the captain that I knew had talked with the general, and so they wrote a little glowing report about me, that I'm a very good social worker, so on and so forth. And so that was 8th Army where I was assigned to. So when I landed at the airport, I had a Jeep waiting for me. Mm-hmm. And which was surprising. And they says, I'm looking for Specialist Houdek. He drove me to the 121st, got me right through. I didn't have to stand in line waiting to sign in and all that. I says, what's going on? We were told by the general that you're a special person. So I said, that's good. So I got there, and I was not in the position I was supposed to be because that position was being filled as a 91 G20. And so I was working on the psychiatric unit, and I wasn't prepared for things I saw.
Were you
Go ahead.
dealing with soldiers that were coming out of Vietnam then?
Yes, there were some that were coming out of Vietnam that I did see, and the unit was approximately 18 beds, if I'm not mistaken, 16 to 18 beds. Plus, we had two padded cells or two padded rooms that if we had someone, and at that time in '69, we didn't know a lot about psychology and how to treat. It was still, it wasn't called post-traumatic stress
Sure.
disorder. It was battle fatigue or whatever.
Right.
So, I was learning because I never, even though I was at Fort Jackson for that time, I never had to go in the hospital for anything because they'd come to us or we'd go out to the post or to the companies and talk with people there. The psychiatrist and the psychologist would be the ones to go in the hospital and treat them and so on and so forth. So to be thrown right when I get into a foreign country and finding out I'm not working in the clinic, but I'm working on the ward, it was a surprise to me. But the position I was filling was an E4. So thank goodness I made E5 in the States because I would have never made an E5 because they won't promote you if you're not in a position or in that title. But I got there and like I say, it was really an interesting scenario because of some of the guys at that time they were using Thorazine, which was an injectable liquid that to try to calm people down. And there was a lot of hallucinating and things like this. There was a young Navy guy that he really had some problems. Unfortunately, we had to strap him down many times. He tried to electrocute himself. There were lights above his bed. Before we started strapping him down, and he uh, he tried to electrocute himself with the fluorescent lights, and he was allowed to smoke. At that time, he could smoke in the hospital. He
Sure.
was burning himself, and he jumped off the bed once. Thank goodness, not head first. I mean, it was very very sad. And some of the guys, a couple of guys, you knew they were fooling around. They really weren't sick, and we found that out quickly and got them out of there. But this one young man that really it bothered me, and I felt so sorry for him. There was nothing we really could do. Even when he talked with the psychiatrist and all this, there was I mean, we eventually sent him to the States, but he was probably on the unit for about 3 weeks. And while I was there, I got to South Korea. That was I had a report from Fort Jackson to Fort Lewis, Washington, in Seattle, and I was there for about 3 days. That was September 1 of '69, and I hooked up with an E8, a master sergeant, while I was there because they wanted us to do KP and all. They'd call you in the common ground there and say, okay, we need some of you for this, that. And the master sergeant says, I'm not doing that. I've served my time. And he says, and you're not doing it with me. You stick around. So the third day, we hadn't been gone. We haven't been sent to Korea yet. And he says, do you want to get out of here? I says, yes, Sarge, I do. And so he went into this office. I followed him. He says, I want to get out of here now. And so does the Spec 5. Let's go to South Korea. We're supposed to be there. Send us there. We left that night, so which was good. So that's from there. Like I say, now we're back at the 121st. But while I got there, a little over a year, or less than a year, after the Pueblo crew was released, if you remember the Pueblo incident, that was our spy ship that was in North Korean waters, and they were captured. And a matter of fact, the boat is still there that they have. But the tensions were very, very high when I got there. There was a lot of infiltration from the north coming over. Some of our men were killed along the DMZ. And so, like I say, it was very, 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 very hard and difficult. And being an E5, I was not issued a weapon.
Right.
E6s and above had the pistols, the Colt 45s, and the E4s and below had the M16s, and I had nothing. I asked the top sergeant, I says, what do I get? He says, grab a broom and just defend yourself. I says, well, if we have to bug out because of if we're going to be attacked, I says, I know how to drive a truck. He says, you want to be a truck driver? I says, yes. So I got my international license, so I was ready to go to Busan with the 121st. So I figured I had to cover my bases. But while I was there is when the My Lai incident came out. And one of Lieutenant Calley's men, they brought him to the 121st, and because of the fact that we had room that we could keep him away from everybody else. He was in there, and he was under guard 24/7. He was there for 2 days. I don't remember his name. He was a corporal. I got to talk with him for about a minute because he was sitting in an area where he could have a smoke, and the MP sort of left, and I was there, and I says, well, what do you think? He says, well, I think we were railroaded. And that's all I want to say on this, because Lieutenant Kelly was cleared from, yes, and that's good, because no one knows, and I don't know, because I've never been in a war zone where I had to work. You don't know what's happening. You don't know how you're going to react. You don't know who's attacking you, if they're friendlies or if they're the enemies. So, but he was gone within a day. And like I say, don't know his name, don't remember. But while I was there was a helicopter crew of 3 going along the Han River, which separated North from South Korea. They accidentally went north instead of south, and they were shot down they realized, and this is what I heard, they realized that about 15 miles in that they were in North Korea, and they were shot down, and they were held captive for almost a month. They did not get much medical attention. They flew into the 121st. They were released there. They were at our unit. They were gone into Japan. They were sent to Japan and then to Hawaii within 24 hours after some examinations. But anyhow, so I did not see much of anything. We were responsible, though, for all military and civilian personnel for South Korea. There were 3 psychiatrists and 2 social workers, myself and another one. And at that time, my ex-wife did come over there. She was with me in South Korea. We lived off post.
Did you marry her in South
Carolina, yes. We got married in May of '69, and then she came there just before the Christmas of '69.
Gotcha.
She flew out, and we had a house in what they call JV, Japanese Village, off the compound or off the post. And so we lived there. The mama-san was in charge of the town, and we had to pay what they call Slicky Boy protection. And Slicky Boy protection was so you wouldn't be robbed or someone breaking your home. She said, you don't worry about that, because if they did it, they'd be found dead the next day. This is my house, and they know it's my house. So we didn't have to worry about too much. Got to know some of the guys from the CID, which was the Intelligence Department for the Army. So we'd go out with them at night, go off post, go out into town, go to Seoul. So it was kind of nice that we could come in and didn't have to worry about being shot at or anything, because there was a curfew, either 11:30 or 12 midnight till 5 or 6 in the morning. So, but anyhow, I went to, we were there, and as of September 10th, I was relieved from duty because I was leaving the 18th of September of '70. So we're just trying to tie up some loose ends, getting someone to buy the furniture that we had bought. So, where we were at, there were a lot of warrant officers because they were helicopter pilots. And the doctors, a couple of the doctors lived there with their wives, that they were able to come in. My wife was allowed but not authorized. So they didn't pay for her to come. They didn't pay for her to go back. But being an E5, I could do this, and then they'd send all my stuff back at no charge. So my last day of work was September 10th. September 12th, the company clerk comes to where we're living and says, the colonel wants to see you. I says, okay, don't know why. So I reported to him, and he says, specialist, I want you to go up to the DMZ. I says, why? I says, I no longer working. I have my health, my papers. I've got my orders. I'm leaving the 18th. I got my 201 file. I got my medical file. He says, I need you up there. I need you to do some interviews with some people up there. I says, and since I was the only other social worker there, I says, well, okay. So I left about, that was on the 10th. No, I'm sorry, the 12th of September. So I left at about noon that day, driven up to the DMZ, and, well, outside the DMZ, because, you had the Panmunjom, which was the truce village. That's where we did the negotiations. So a mile and a half out, we had our post, and a mile and a half the other way, the North Koreans had their post. Very strange up there, because I saw the bridge of no return, where on the north side of the Han River was a North Korean guard post, on the south was an American guard post, and about another 1,000 feet was another North Korean guard post. So that was the loneliest post in the world, they said, because if they were attacked, they would be dead. But it was very somber up there. But I was there from about 1:30 on that day till probably about 3:30, 4 o'clock the next day. So I was there about 25 hours before I came back, reported to the colonel and all this, and so on and so forth. And so then we flew out on the 18th of September. And then that's my military history. I mean, I didn't see too much. I wasn't in the infantry, but that's my story. I'm sticking to it, Sarah.
Did you, when you returned home,
Yes.
did you stay in the same field since you were just like
No, actually,
social work field?
no. What I did, flew into Seattle at Fort Leonard or Fort Lewis, Washington, and flew out the next day. We stayed overnight, my wife and I, and then I flew back down to South Carolina. And I got out of the service. I didn't know what I was going to do. I really didn't. There was a Captain Dave Dodge at Fort Jackson. He was one of the social workers, and he was working at that time for the state of South Carolina, the penal department, or jail. So I talked with him about getting to work there because he knew me from Fort Jackson. And he said, well, you got to have a 4-year degree. You have to have your degree in sociology in order to work for the state. Well, I went back to college. Thank you for Uncle Sam, GI Bill, at University of South Carolina, and got my degree. And let's see, and that was in 1974. And that's when I moved back to Illinois with my wife. I got my degree. I figured I could do something else. While I was working there, I worked for a car wash company. That was a job they offered me as an assistant manager. One of the young men that was working for me, his father happened to be a vice president at C&S Bank in Columbia, South Carolina, Citizens in Southern South Carolina. And Pat Foy was his name. And he talked to his dad about me, saying what a nice guy, and I handled people well. And so I got hired with theirs in their human resources department, or personnel is what they called it.
Okay.
And that's how I started my banking career. I was in banking for 41 years.
Okay.
Retired March 30th of 2012 from a bank in Chicago. And now I'm working for a little credit union in Franklin Park as a retailer and receptionist. And I love it.
Wonderful.
And that's basically it. So.
Do you keep in touch with any of the gentlemen you served
No,
with?
no, I didn't. I wish I would have, and I think that's why with the American Legion it's been kind of important to me. In 2000, the village of Franklin Park put up a memorial for veterans.
Mm-hmm.
They have 5 monoliths. They're about 8 or 9 feet tall, and I videotaped the whole thing just because I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't with the American Legion at that time, and so. One of the commander at that time, Tom Ayers, found out who was videotaping and sent me a letter in the mail, which I still have in the refrigerator. It says, why don't you come in one day and see our post? So I went in and I says, yeah, I'll join. And it's been uphill since then. So I've been a member for 13 years with Post 974 in Franklin Park.
Uh-huh.
I'm past commander 2009 to 2011, 2 years. I've been captain of our Honor Guard and Color Guard for 8 years, and I've been Sergeant of Arms now for the last 2 years and 3 years before I became commander. And I truly enjoyed it. I'm a delegate here for our post for the state convention. And that's it. I mean, it's not too interesting a life.
No, you did a nice job. How about any travels? Did you travel anywhere else where you were in Korea?
No,
you were there almost
went to
8
Seoul
months.
a few times, and that was it. No, I did not get any time off, or what are they called?
R&R, no.
R&R, no.
Okay.
I stayed there the whole time. Saw a little bit of the town of Seoul, went there a few times. Very interesting. If you take a cab there, at that time, they didn't use the horns that much to stop. I mean, these taxi drivers had these little small little Toyotas or Datsuns at that time. And all they used, downshift on the gears and beep the horn and downshift them. I mean, I like to drive, but I did not like them driving for me. Well, there we go.
We'll have to move again.
Okay.
When you returned home, Joe,
Yes.
Was your family there to greet you when you came home?
No.
How would you describe the reception when you came home?
I was lucky. I mean, I know a lot of our veterans that served in Vietnam, and some of them from our posts. They were called a lot of names, baby killers. They were spit at. They were sworn at. I got into Fort Lewis, Washington, and I wore my uniform going home we flew into Chicago. I think we spent a day there and then flew to South Carolina. And I never had anyone say anything bad to me. So I guess I must have been a fortunate young man at that time to have that. So I did not experience that. Like I said, I had a good experience in the service. The only thing was when I went to the 121st and working in the ward. I worked in there for 2 months before I then started, because the two guys that were
Sure.
there left, and then I started doing the actual counseling. But that was the time of my life that, I feel sorry. Could I really do something? I felt that my hands were tied. I really couldn't do anything. And you can just give them so much Thorazine, and the doctors could do whatever they could, and that was it. Things have changed now. At least I'm hoping they are. And we need to take care of our veterans, our young men and women that are coming home. That probably, Vietnam did a lot as far as using helicopters and mobile Army surgical hospitals, MASH units there. And we've learned a lot more in these last few years in Iraq and Afghanistan. But to be a triple amputee, or your head,
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd want to live that way. And I feel sorry for these young men and women. I hope we get out of there soon. I really do. We need to have them home. We need to stop this killing. We need to stop killing our young men and women, and even older men and women that are serving our country. So all I can say is, thank God I'm an American. God bless America. God bless our military personnel, and bring them home safely. And thank you for the opportunity of serving my country.
Joe, thank you so much for your service. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.